My hands shook as I dialed 911, blood dripping from my split lip onto the phone screen. The operator's voice crackled through. 911, what's your emergency? I opened my mouth to speak, to finally tell someone about the monster living in our house. Then suddenly, silence. Complete, deafening silence. I looked up to see my mother standing in the doorway, the router's power cord dangling from her hand like a noose. Her face was stone cold, devoid of any maternal instinct. "Don't embarrass this family," she said quietly. As my stepfather's footsteps thundered up the stairs behind her, "My name is Madeline Harper, and until 6 months ago, I believed in second chances. At 28, I had a decent job at Everhart Financial Consulting in downtown Ridgewood, Illinois, a small apartment I was proud of, and what I thought was a healing family. My father died when I was 7, a car accident that left my mother, Elaine, scrambling to keep us afloat. For years, it was just the two of us against the world. Then she met Gregory Dalton. Greg swept into our lives like a savior. He was everything my mother needed. Successful, charming, stable. He owned a mid-sized logistics company, drove a pristine Mercedes, and lived in a colonial house in the suburbs that looked like something out of a magazine. When they married 3 years ago, I was genuinely happy for her. She deserved love after everything she'd been through. The red flags started small, so small I convinced myself I was imagining them. Greg would make comments about my appearance at family dinners. "Maybe skip the bread. Maddie, you want to keep that figure for finding a husband, don't you?" He'd laugh like it was a joke, and Mom would give me that look that said, "Don't make a scene." Then came the career observations. Despite my MBA and steady promotions at Everhart, Greg never missed an opportunity to diminish my achievements. "Financial consulting," he'd say to his business partners at gatherings. "It's basically glorified data entry, isn't it? Not like running a real business." He'd always compare me to Lily, my half-sister from Mom's second marriage, who was 15 and had so much potential because she wanted to study medicine. The isolation crept in gradually. Weekend plans with friends would mysteriously conflict with important family obligations. Greg would spring on us last minute. My college roommate Sarah's wedding? Greg had planned a family reunion that same weekend, one that, coincidentally, never materialized. My cousin's birthday party? Greg needed me to help with his company's quarterly filing, even though I'd never worked for him. "He's just protective," Mom would say, reorganizing the kitchen for the 3rd time that month, a nervous habit she'd developed since marrying Greg. "He wants us to be a close family, and is that so terrible?" But I knew the truth she couldn't admit. We weren't a close family. We were a controlled family. Greg held the purse strings, and he made sure we never forgot it. Mom had quit her job as a dental hygienist after they married. Greg insisted he could provide for everyone. Now she depended on him for everything from grocery money to gas for her car. The house itself became a monument to his control. Every piece of furniture, every painting on the wall, every appliance in the kitchen, all chosen by Greg, all constant reminders of his dominance. Even the family photos were strategically curated. Pictures of Greg's business achievements dominated the mantel, while photos of my father had been relegated to a dusty album in the basement. I started noticing things: documents left on his home office desk, hushed phone conversations that ended abruptly when I entered the room, the way Mom's name appeared on papers she'd never mentioned signing. There was something about the way she'd flinch when the mail arrived, quickly shuffling through it before Greg got home, hiding certain envelopes in her purse. The worst part? Everyone else thought we were perfect. Greg had crafted our public image meticulously. At church, at the country club, at his company events, we were the Daltons, the successful blended family. He'd rest his hand on my shoulder possessively during introductions, calling me his ambitious stepdaughter with a smile that never reached his eyes. People would comment on how lucky Mom was, how wonderful it was that Greg had taken on raising another man's child. They didn't see what happened when the doors closed. They didn't hear the lectures about gratitude, the subtle threats disguised as concern, the way he'd mentioned my father's life insurance policy that really should be managed more carefully. They didn't know that the college fund my father left me had been mysteriously transferred to a joint account I'd never agreed to open. Standing in my childhood bedroom, now redecorated in the sterile beige Greg preferred, I stared at the single photo of my father I'd managed to keep on my nightstand. He was pushing me on a swing, both of us laughing at something I couldn't remember. I wondered what he would think of the man who'd taken his place, of what our family had become. That night, as I listened to Greg's booming voice downstairs explaining to Mom why her sister wasn't welcome for Thanksgiving, "Too much drama. Elaine, you know how your family is." I made my first recording on my phone. It was a small act of defiance, barely anything at all. I had no idea it would be the beginning of everything. The recordings became my lifeline. Tiny acts of rebellion that kept me sane. Every condescending comment, every controlling demand, every moment of manipulation. I captured them all. Greg had no idea that his stepdaughter, whom he considered barely worthy of notice, was documenting his true nature. The escalation was gradual but relentless. Greg started showing up at my office unannounced, claiming he was in the neighborhood and wanted to take me to lunch. These weren't invitations, they were inspections. He'd quiz me about my coworkers, especially the men, and make pointed comments about my professional wardrobe. That skirt seems short for an office environment, doesn't it? We wouldn't want people getting the wrong idea about what kind of girl you are. At home, he installed a new family budget system that required detailed receipts for every purchase. Mom and I had to submit weekly expense reports like we were employees rather than family. My morning coffee? Frivolous. The professional development course I wanted to take? Unnecessary. Meanwhile, Greg's golf club membership and expensive scotch collection were networking investments. The real violation came on a Thursday evening in October. I'd just received a promotion at Everhart, senior financial analyst, with a substantial raise. I was ecstatic, planning to celebrate with friends that weekend. When I told Mom, her face lit up for the first time in months. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered, hugging me tight. Greg's reaction was different. "Senior analyst?" He barely looked up from his tablet. "Hope you're not getting too ambitious, Maddie. Men don't like women who prioritize career over family." Then, almost casually, he added, "Speaking of family priorities, we need to discuss your living situation. This promotion means you can contribute more to the household expenses. I'm thinking 40% of your salary would be fair." "I don't live here full-time anymore," I reminded him. "I have my own apartment." His smile was sharp as glass. "But you stay here weekends. You eat our food, use our utilities. Family contributes. Madeline, or are you too good for this family now?" That night, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. While looking for my birth certificate to update my work records, I found a folder in Greg's office marked Estate Planning. Inside were documents about my father's life insurance and the trust he'd set up for me, but the signatures, they weren't mine. The handwriting was similar, practiced, but not mine. The papers showed the trust had been dissolved, the funds transferred to an account under Dalton Family Holdings, LLC. My inheritance, the money my father had scraped together working double shifts as an electrician, the security he'd died believing he'd left me, was gone. I confronted Mom first, privately, showing her the papers with shaking hands. She went pale, then red, then pale again. "It's for tax purposes," she said weakly. "Greg knows about these things. He's protecting the money, making it grow." "Protecting it? Mom, he stole it! This is fraud!" "Don't be dramatic. Madeline, Greg wouldn't. He loves us. He takes care of us. He takes care of controlling us." I pulled out my phone, played her a recording of Greg telling his business partner that women were naturally bad with money and needed firm guidance from men who knew better. Mom's hands trembled as she pushed my phone away. "You recorded him? In his own home? How could you betray him like that?" The word hung between us. Betray. Not him betraying us by stealing, by controlling, by diminishing, but me betraying him by documenting the truth. That weekend, Greg announced a new rule at dinner. For family harmony, he said, cutting into his steak with surgical precision, I'll be managing all family finances directly. Elaine agrees it's for the best. Mom nodded mechanically, not meeting my eyes. That includes you, Madeline. You'll have your paychecks deposited into the family account, and I'll provide you with an allowance appropriate for a young woman your age. I'm 28, not 12. His fork paused midair. While you're part of this family, you'll follow family rules. Your mother and I have discussed it, haven't we, Elaine? Mom's voice was barely a whisper. Yes. I looked at my mother, the woman who'd once worked 16-hour days to keep us afloat after Dad died, who'd taught me to be independent, to never rely on anyone completely, and didn't recognize her anymore. She'd been hollowed out, replaced with a nervous shadow who lived in fear of her husband's disapproval. That night, I transferred all my recordings to a cloud account and started researching lawyers. I also reached out to my father's old friend, an accountant named Tom Morrison, asking him to quietly look into the trust fund documentation. Greg must have sensed my resistance because his tactics shifted. Suddenly, he was interested in my work, asking detailed questions about Everhart's clients, our financial strategies, our proprietary software systems. When I stayed vague, he'd get Mom to ask instead, knowing I found it harder to refuse her. The trap was closing around me, and I could feel it. Every day brought new restrictions, new demands, new violations of boundaries. But I kept recording, kept documenting, kept building my case, because somewhere underneath the fear and anger, a plan was forming. Greg thought he'd won, that he'd successfully caged another woman in his collection. He didn't know that cages work both ways. They keep things in, but they also show exactly what kind of monster lives outside the bars. The explosion came on a Friday night in November. I'd spent the week dodging Greg's increasingly aggressive demands to sign papers transferring my remaining assets, a small investment account my father had started when I was born, into his family management portfolio. Each refusal made him angrier, the mask of civilized control slipping more each day. That evening, I came home to find Greg in his office with Mom and a man I didn't recognize, a lawyer. Judging by his expensive suit and briefcase, papers were spread across the desk, and Mom was signing something with mechanical precision. Perfect timing, Madeline, Greg said, his voice deceptively pleasant. Mr. Brennan here needs your signature on these transfer documents. I looked at the papers. They weren't just about the investment account. They included power of attorney forms, documents giving Greg control over any inheritance I might receive, and buried in the legalese, a transfer of shares I didn't know I had in my father's electrician business that his partner had kept running. I'm not signing anything. Greg's face darkened. You're being childish. This is for the family's financial security. No, it's for your financial security. I've seen the debts, Greg, the loans you've hidden from Mom. You're using our assets to cover your bad investments. The silence was deafening. Mom's pen stopped moving. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. What did you say? Greg's voice was dangerously quiet. Tom Morrison helped me trace the money. You've been borrowing against the house, against Mom's name, against my stolen trust fund. Your company is hemorrhaging money, isn't it? That's why you need our signatures. That's why. The desk lamp flew past my head, shattering against the wall. Mom screamed. The lawyer scrambled backward, papers scattering. Get out! Greg roared, his face purple with rage. You ungrateful little bitch! After everything I've done for you. Everything you've done to us, you mean? I shot back, adrenaline overriding fear. He lunged around the desk faster than I expected. His hand caught my wrist, twisting hard enough to make me cry out. Mom was sobbing, begging him to stop, but she didn't move from her chair, trained too well to intervene. I wrenched free and ran to my room, Greg's footsteps thundering behind me. I slammed the door, fumbled with the lock, and grabbed my phone. My fingers shook as I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? My stepfather is... The door shook as Greg pounded on it. Open this door now. Sir, I need you to. Then nothing. Silence. The call dropped. I stared at my phone. No signal. The Wi-Fi indicator was gone. I looked up to see the door cracking under Greg's assault, and there, in the hallway behind him, stood my mother. In her hands was our router, its power cord trailing behind her like a confession. Our eyes met across the chaos. In that moment, I saw everything: her fear, her complicity, her choice. She had chosen him, chosen his money, his control, his violence over her daughter's safety. "Don't embarrass this family, Maddie," she said quietly, as Greg threw his shoulder against the door again. The wood splintered. Greg burst through, his face contorted with fury. I dropped the phone and grabbed the nearest thing, a heavy bookend shaped like a globe that my father had given me. "You're going to sign those papers," he snarled, advancing on me. "One way or another." "Never." He grabbed for me, and I swung the bookend. It connected with his shoulder, making him howl and stumble back. I darted past him, past my mother who stood frozen in the hallway, and ran for the front door. "You come back here," Greg bellowed. "Elaine, stop her." But I was already gone, barefoot and coatless in the November cold. Running toward my car, I heard Greg shouting behind me, threatening to call the police and report the car stolen. It was in my name. To destroy my career. To make sure I never saw my mother again. I drove straight to Rachel Kimball's apartment. Rachel and I had known each other since college, and she'd become a fierce advocate for domestic abuse survivors at her law firm. She took one look at my wrist, already bruising in the shape of fingers, and pulled me inside. "We're filing a police report," she said firmly. I tried calling 911. My mother, she disconnected the router. She stopped me from getting help. Rachel's face went hard. "Then we're filing charges against both of them. And Madeline, you're not going back. Ever." As I sat in Rachel's kitchen, ice on my wrist and her cat purring in my lap, I felt something shift inside me. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something harder, colder. Greg had finally shown his true face, and Mom had shown hers too. They'd broken something in me tonight. Not my spirit, but my last reservations about what needed to be done. "Rachel," I said quietly, "I have recordings, months of them, and evidence of fraud, theft, tax evasion. How much damage could we do with that?" She looked at me for a long moment, then smiled, sharp and dangerous. "Honey, with what you're describing, we could destroy him, completely." "Good," I said, meaning it. "Let's begin." The war for my freedom had officially started, and I intended to win. Rachel's apartment became my war room. We spread documents across her dining table like battle plans, bank statements, forged signatures, shell company registrations, tax documents that didn't add up. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered over months formed a devastating picture of Gregory Dalton's empire of fraud. "This is bigger than I thought," Rachel muttered, cross-referencing a property deed with a loan document. "He's not just stealing from you and your mother. Look at these business accounts." She was right. Greg had been siphoning money from his own company, using employee pension funds as his personal piggy bank, and hiding it all through a web of LLCs registered in Mom's name. She probably didn't even know she was listed as the owner of 3 shell companies. Tom Morrison, my father's old friend, proved invaluable. He'd quietly investigated the trust fund trail and discovered something shocking. Greg had started planning this before he even married Mom. There were emails to financial advisors asking about hypothetical scenarios for accessing a stepchild's trust fund, dated 2 months before the wedding. "He targeted her," I said, the realization hitting like ice water. He knew about Dad's life insurance, the trust, everything. Mom wasn't a wife to him. She was a mark. Rachel nodded grimly. "And you were collateral damage, or supposed to be." My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Mom, alternating between guilt trips and threats. "You're destroying our family." "Greg is heartbroken. He only wanted to help you." "If you don't come home, we'll have you charged with theft and assault." Please, Maddie. I'm your mother. I didn't respond to any of them, but I kept screenshots of everything, especially the threats. The police report had been filed, but as Rachel warned, domestic violence cases were hard to prosecute without physical evidence beyond bruising. Greg had been smart, until that final night. He'd kept his abuse psychological and financial, but financial crimes? Those left paper trails? We need more, Rachel said one evening, pacing her living room. The fraud is clear, but to really nail him, we need someone on the inside. That's when I remembered Derek. I'd met Greg's son from his first marriage only once, at the wedding. Derek had been polite but distant, leaving early with barely a goodbye. Greg had dismissed him as ungrateful and jealous of my new family. But there had been something in Derek's eyes when he looked at his father, recognition of a predator. Finding Derek took some detective work, but social media eventually led me to him. He was living in Wisconsin, working as a software engineer. When I called and introduced myself, there was a long silence. "So he's doing it again," Derek finally said, his voice heavy with unsurprise. "Again? Why do you think my parents really divorced? Mom tried to protect me from knowing the full truth, but I found out anyway. He drained their joint accounts, took loans against the house without telling her, and when she confronted him, he paused. Let's just say you're lucky you got out when you did." Derek agreed to help immediately. More than that, he had something invaluable: access to Greg's company servers. His father, in typical arrogant fashion, had never revoked Derek's administrative access from when he'd helped set up the IT system years ago. "I can get you everything," Derek said. "Emails, financial records, even the real books, not the ones he shows the IRS." While Derek worked his digital magic, Rachel built our legal strategy. We weren't just going after Greg for domestic violence anymore. We were building a federal case for fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. The IRS and SEC would be very interested in what we'd found. But we needed one more piece: proof that Mom was a victim, not a willing accomplice. Without it, she could go down with Greg, painted as his partner in crime. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The lawyer who'd been in Greg's office that night, Mr. Brennan, reached out to Rachel. He was nervous, speaking carefully about ethical concerns regarding his client. "Mrs. Dalton seemed impaired during our meeting," he said carefully. "She was signing documents without reading them, appeared confused when asked direct questions, and after what I witnessed with the young lady." "Would you be willing to make a statement?" Rachel asked. He hesitated. "If subpoenaed, I would have to tell the truth about what I observed." It wasn't enthusiastic cooperation, but it was enough. A lawyer acknowledging Mom's impaired state and the violence he'd witnessed would be powerful testimony. As November turned to December, our case solidified. Derek had pulled gigabytes of incriminating data from Greg's servers. We had documented fraud totaling over $3 million. The pension fund theft alone would trigger a federal investigation. "We could go to the authorities now," Rachel said, reviewing our arsenal. "But I think you want more than just justice. You want revenge." She was right. I wanted Greg to lose everything: his reputation, his business, his freedom. But more than that, I wanted him to know that I was the one who took it all away. The stepdaughter he'd dismissed and abused would be his downfall. "The company Christmas party," I said suddenly. "It's December 15th, black tie. All his investors and business partners will be there. He always does this big presentation about the year's successes and next year's projections." Rachel's smile was slow and wicked. "A public takedown. I like it." "Can we time it? Have everything hit at once?" "With the right coordination between agencies, absolutely. But Madeline, once we pull this trigger, there's no going back. Your mother will probably never forgive you." I thought about Mom standing in that hallway, router in hand, choosing Greg's reputation over my safety. She already made her choice. Now I'm making mine. We spent the next 2 weeks perfecting our plan. Every detail had to be right. Every agency had to be ready to move, and I had to be there to watch it all come crashing down. Greg thought he'd won when I ran from that house. He had no idea he'd already lost everything. He just didn't know it yet. Derek arrived in Chicago 3 days before the Christmas party, carrying external drives loaded with evidence that would bury his father. When we met at Rachel's office, I was struck by how much he looked like Greg. Same strong jaw, same dark eyes, but without the cruelty that twisted his father's features. "I've wanted to do this for years," Derek admitted, handing over the drives. "But I was young, scared, and Mom begged me to just let it go and move on. She didn't want me consumed by revenge." "What changed your mind?" "You did. When you called, I realized he'd never stop unless someone stopped him. My silence let him hurt you and your mother. That's on me." "It's not your fault," I said firmly. "It's his." Derek had brought more than just financial records. He had correspondence between Greg and his business partners discussing illegal tactics to undercut competitors. Emails where Greg explicitly instructed his accountant to make the numbers work, regardless of reality. And most damning, a recorded phone call where Greg bragged about having total control over Elaine's assets and how the daughter will fall in line eventually. They always do. "He recorded his own calls?" I asked, incredulous. "Narcissist habit? He likes to replay his victories. Kept them on a private server he thought no one knew about." Derek's smile was grim. "He taught me to never leave digital footprints. Guess he should have followed his own advice." Rachel had been busy too. She'd coordinated with the FBI's white-collar crime division, the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit, and the Illinois State Attorney's Office. They were building their own cases based on our evidence, but Rachel had negotiated something special. They would execute their warrants simultaneously at Greg's Christmas party. "They love high-profile takedowns," Rachel explained. "Makes great press. Deters other criminals. Greg's party is perfect. Public enough for impact. Contained enough for control." But there was a problem. Mom had been calling Rachel's office, trying to find me. Her messages were increasingly frantic. "She says Greg is getting suspicious." Rachel told me, "He knows you're planning something. He's moving assets, destroying documents." Derek confirmed it. "He's panicking. Transferred a bunch of money offshore yesterday. If he runs..." "He won't run," I said with certainty. "His ego won't let him. The Christmas party is his big moment, where he shows off his success. He'd never miss it." To ensure Greg stayed put, I played a dangerous game. I sent Mom a single text. "I'll be at the party. We can talk then." Her response was immediate. "Thank God. Greg will be so relieved. We can fix this, sweetheart, as a family." The night before the party, Derek revealed one last piece of information that changed everything. "I've been in touch with Mom," he said quietly. "Did you know there are others?" "Others?" "Women Greg dated before your mother. 3 that I've found. All widows or divorcees with inheritance or insurance money. All left financially ruined after relationships with him. One of them, Patricia Morse, tried to press charges 5 years ago. Greg buried her in legal fees until she gave up." I stared at the names Derek had written down. 3 women, 3 families destroyed before ours. Mom wasn't his first victim. She was just his most successful con. "Can we reach them?" I asked. "Already did. Patricia is willing to testify if Greg is prosecuted. The others are too scared, but they provided statements through their lawyers." Rachel incorporated this new information into her package for the authorities. Greg wasn't just a one-time fraudster. He was a serial predator who specialized in vulnerable women with financial assets. The morning of December 15th, I stood in Rachel's bathroom, staring at my reflection. I'd bought a new dress for the occasion. Black, elegant, expensive. If I was walking into battle, I wanted armor that made me feel powerful. "You don't have to be there," Rachel said from the doorway. "The FBI doesn't need you present." "I know, but I need to see his face when he realizes he's lost everything. And..." I hesitated. "I need to see Mom one last time, to know if there's anything left of the woman who raised me." Derek had decided not to attend. I've had enough of his parties for a lifetime, but he gave me something to carry, a photo of his mother. taken the day their divorce was finalized. "She's smiling," he explained. "First real smile I'd seen from her in years. Show it to your mom if you get the chance. Tell her there's life after Greg Dalton." That evening, as I drove toward the Riverside Banquet Hall where Greg held his annual party, my phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. "All teams in position. Operation launches at 8:47 p.m., right after his presentation starts." I pulled into the parking lot at 8:15, watching the valets handle luxury cars, seeing Greg's business associates in their finest clothes, all walking into what they thought was a celebration. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of my car. The valet looked confused. I wasn't on the guest list anymore, but I walked past him with such confidence that he didn't stop me. Inside, the ballroom glittered with lights and wealth, and there, at the center of it all, stood Greg in a perfect tuxedo, laughing with investors, completely unaware that his empire would crumble in exactly 28 minutes. Mom saw me first. Her face went white, then red with relief. She rushed over, tears in her eyes. "Maddie, thank God you came. Greg's been so worried. We can fix everything tonight, I promise." I looked at the woman who had chosen my abuser over me and felt nothing. The mother I'd loved was gone, replaced by Greg's accomplice. "Yes, Mom," I said quietly. "Everything gets fixed tonight." The ballroom was Greg's temple, and he was its false prophet. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over 200 guests, all here to worship at the altar of his fabricated success. I accepted a champagne flute from a passing waiter, using it as a prop while I watched Greg work the room. Mom stayed close to me, her nervous energy palpable. "He'll want to talk to you before the presentation," she whispered. "Please, Maddie, just apologize. He's willing to forgive everything if you just come home." "Forgive me?" I kept my voice level. "For what exactly?" "For the scene you caused, the accusations. Mr. Brennan was very disturbed." Before I could respond, Greg materialized beside us, his hand landing possessively on Mom's shoulder. She flinched, a tiny movement, but I caught it. "Madeline," his voice was warm for the audience, but his eyes were arctic. "How wonderful that you've come to your senses." "Hello, Greg?" He leaned in, his cologne overwhelming. "We'll discuss your behavior later. For now, smile and play the loving daughter. Don't embarrass me again." I glanced at my phone. 8:31 p.m. 16 minutes. "Of course," I said sweetly. "I wouldn't dream of embarrassing you." He studied me suspiciously but was quickly pulled away by an investor wanting to discuss the new Singapore expansion, an expansion funded by stolen money that would never happen. I drifted through the crowd, noting faces I recognized from Greg's home office meetings. There was Harrison Mills, who'd invested his retirement fund in Greg's company, Jennifer Park, who'd trusted Greg with her late husband's estate management, Tom Bradley, whose construction company had extended Greg massive credit based on fraudulent contracts. All of them would learn the truth tonight. At 8:40, Greg moved toward the presentation area. A projection screen descended behind the podium, displaying his company logo and Dalton Logistics, building tomorrow's supply chain. "Ladies and gentlemen," Greg began, his voice booming with false authority, "tonight, I'm thrilled to share our remarkable achievements and even more remarkable future." I positioned myself near the main entrance, heart hammering. Mom stood by Greg's side on the stage, the perfect trophy wife in her sapphire gown, bought, no doubt, with my father's money. "This year alone, Dalton Logistics has increased revenue by 40%, Greg continued, clicking through slides of fabricated numbers. "Our innovative restructuring of pension allocations has freed up capital for aggressive expansion." 8:45 p.m. I saw movement outside the ballroom's glass doors. Dark suits, FBI windbreakers, they were here. "By Q2 next year, we project—" The ballroom doors burst open. "FBI, nobody move!" The room erupted in chaos. Champagne glasses shattered. Someone screamed. But Greg stood frozen at the podium, his face cycling through confusion, rage, and finally, fear. Gregory Dalton, the lead agent announced, moving through the parting crowd. You're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, and money laundering. This is a mistake, Greg sputtered. I want my lawyer. But the projection screen behind him flickered to life, not with his presentation, but with evidence. His emails discussing the pension theft, the forged signatures, the shell companies, the stolen trust funds. Someone, Derek, remotely, was broadcasting everything. The room gasped collectively. I saw Harrison Mills sink into a chair. Jennifer Park covered her mouth in horror. Turn that off, Greg roared. But the tech team was already being questioned by agents. As the FBI agents reached the stage, Greg's eyes found mine across the room. The realization hit him like a physical blow. You, he snarled. You did this, you little… Mr. Dalton? You have the right to remain silent, the agent interrupted. Pulling Greg's hands behind his back, the satisfying click of handcuffs echoed through the silent ballroom. Mom stood on stage, swaying like she might faint. There's been a mistake, she kept repeating. Greg would never… The money was for our family. An IRS agent approached her gently. Ma'am, we need to speak with you as well. You're listed as the owner of several companies involved in this fraud. I don't own any companies, Mom's voice broke. I don't understand. I walked toward the stage, every eye following me. When I reached Mom, I pulled out Derek's photo, his mother, finally free, finally smiling. This is Greg's ex-wife, I said quietly. The day she escaped him, you can escape too. Mom, tell them the truth. Tell them how he made you sign papers without reading them. Tell them about the control, the manipulation. Mr. Brennan already gave a statement about your impaired state during meetings. Mom looked at the photo, then at Greg being led away in handcuffs, then at me. You planned this. You destroyed him. No, Mom, he destroyed himself. I just made sure everyone saw it. Greg was almost at the door when he broke free momentarily, turning back to shout, Elaine, don't say anything. Remember what we discussed. The threat in his voice was clear. Even now, in handcuffs, he was trying to control her. Something flickered in Mom's eyes. For the first time in years, I saw a spark of the woman who'd raised me alone, who'd been strong before Greg hollowed her out. Mrs. Dalton, the IRS agent said gently, if you've been coerced or threatened, that changes everything. We can help you. Mom looked at me one last time, then at Greg being dragged away, and finally at the room full of people he'd defrauded. I want to cooperate, she said quietly. I'll tell you everything. As chaos continued around us, agents seizing documents, guests giving statements, news crews arriving outside, I slipped out a side door. My part was done. Rachel would handle the legal aftermath. Derek would help authorities navigate the digital evidence. Mom would hopefully find her way back to herself. Standing in the parking lot, watching police cars take Gregory Dalton away, I felt the weight of months lift from my shoulders. He'd taken my inheritance, my family, my sense of safety. But in the end, I'd taken everything from him. My phone buzzed. Rachel. Complete success. Agencies estimate he'll face 20+ years. You did it. I looked up at the stars barely visible beyond the city lights and whispered, That was for you, Dad. He'll never hurt anyone else. 3 weeks after the arrest, Mom showed up at Rachel's apartment. I'd been expecting her eventually, but seeing her standing in the doorway still made my chest tighten. She looked different, older, frailer, but also somehow more present than she'd been in years. May I come in? She asked quietly. Rachel looked at me questioningly. I nodded. We sat across from each other at Rachel's kitchen table, the same one where I'd planned Greg's downfall. Mom's hands were folded tightly in her lap, her wedding ring gone. The FBI cleared me, she began. They confirmed I was a victim, the lawyers, the therapist they brought in. They all said Greg had been systematically breaking me down. Classic coercive control, they called it. I waited, I'd learned the power of silence. I'm staying with my sister in Naperville, she continued. The house is being sold as part of the asset forfeiture. Everything is, she laughed bitterly. Turns out none of it was really ours anyway. All bought with stolen money.
I know.
Her eyes filled with tears. Maddie, that night, when you called 911, when I unplugged the router. You chose him. No, she said firmly, surprising me. I chose fear. I was terrified. Maddie, not just of him, but of losing everything, of admitting I'd made such a terrible mistake. I'd given up my job, my independence, my identity. If Greg was a monster, what did that make me for bringing him into our lives? A victim, I said, echoing what the FBI had concluded. But also someone who had a choice in that moment, and you chose wrong. She flinched but didn't deny it. You're right, I failed you in the worst possible way. A mother's first job is to protect her child. And I didn't just fail, I actively chose not to protect you. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, Chicago traffic hummed its constant song. The therapist says it will take years to undo what he did to my mind, Mom said. The gaslighting, the isolation, the financial abuse, I didn't even know those terms before. I just thought I was going crazy, that I was weak and stupid like he always said. You weren't stupid. He was a professional predator. Derek's mother called me, Mom said suddenly. Patricia, the one from before me. She called too. We've been talking. It helps. Knowing I wasn't the only one who fell for it. Patricia said something that stuck with me. He doesn't choose weak women. He chooses strong women and breaks them down because defeating someone strong makes him feel more powerful. I thought about that. About the mother who'd once worked double shifts and raised me alone, who'd been so strong before Greg. Why are you here, Mom? She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. 2 reasons. First, this is yours. It's from the Victim Restitution Fund. Not everything that was stolen. That'll take years to sort out. But enough to cover what was in your trust immediately. I took the envelope without opening it. Money had never been the point. And second, she continued, her voice breaking, to tell you that you saved my life, not metaphorically, literally. The FBI found something during their investigation. Greg had taken out a life insurance policy on me 6 months ago, $2 million. The psychiatrist they brought in said that given his escalating behavior and financial desperation, she didn't need to finish. I felt sick. He was going to kill you. Probably make it seem like a tragic accident, she said softly. The expert explained that I was already so isolated and worn down that everyone would have believed it. She brushed away her tears. You didn't just fight for justice. Maddie, you saved me from something I never even saw coming. I wanted to feel vindicated, but all I felt was tired. What do you want from me, Mom? Nothing, she said quickly. I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't deserve a relationship with you. I just needed you to know that I understand now. What he was, what I let him do, what you had to do to stop him, and that I'm getting help. Real help. She stood to leave, then paused. The investigator told me about the recordings, how long you'd been collecting evidence. You fought for us both, even when I was fighting against you. That's a strength I never had. You had it once, I said quietly. Maybe you'll find it again. She nodded, tears streaming. I'm going to try. The woman Greg married. I'm going to try to find her again, or maybe become someone better. Someone who would never, ever unplug that router. At the door, she turned back one last time. Your father would be so proud of you. You fought back in a way he would have admired. Smart, strategic, thorough. You got the justice he would have wanted. After she left, Rachel sat beside me. How do you feel? Empty, I admitted. I thought confronting her would give me closure, but I just feel hollow. Trauma doesn't resolve neatly, Rachel said gently. And you've been in survival mode for so long, it makes sense that you'd feel empty now that the fight is over. But it wasn't quite over. There was still the trial to come, the testimony I'd have to give, the final legal proceedings, And there was still the question of whether Mom and I could ever rebuild anything from the ashes of what Greg had burned down. That night, I opened the envelope Mom had brought. Inside was a check and a note in her handwriting. "This doesn't fix anything, but it's yours, as your father intended. Build the life he dreamed for you. Build it without fear. Mom." I stared at the note for a long time, then picked up my phone and sent a single text. "Thank you for coming today. Good luck with your healing." Her response was immediate. "Good luck with yours, too." It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation, but it was acknowledgement of the harm done, the choices made, and the long roads we both had ahead. Tomorrow, I'd start looking for my own apartment again, somewhere Greg had never been, where I could build a life untouched by his poison. But tonight, I sat with Rachel, safe and seen, finally free from the man who'd tried to cage us all. The federal courthouse in downtown Chicago felt like a fortress of justice as I walked up its stone steps 6 months later. The trial had been swift. Greg's lawyers had tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the evidence was so overwhelming that the prosecution refused anything less than serious time. Inside the courtroom, I saw faces I recognized: Harrison Mills, Jennifer Park, other victims of Greg's fraud who'd come to witness justice. Derek sat in the back row, having flown in to testify. Mom was there too, in a separate section with other witnesses, looking healthier than she had in years. Greg, in an orange jumpsuit, looked diminished. The man who'd once dominated every room now sat hunched beside his public defender, his empire reduced to a case number. When they called me to testify, I walked to the stand with steady steps. I told the truth, all of it. The financial abuse, the control, the night of violence, the router being unplugged. I played the recordings for the court, Greg's own voice condemning him. His attorney tried to paint me as a vindictive stepdaughter angry about inheritance money, but the evidence spoke louder than his insinuations. Derek's testimony about his mother's experience established a pattern. The financial forensics were undeniable. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon. Guilty on all counts: wire fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, money laundering, and conspiracy. The judge, a stern woman who'd seen too many men like Greg, sentenced him to 22 years in federal prison with no possibility of early release for 15. As the bailiffs led Greg away, he turned to look at me one last time. I expected rage, threats, something violent. Instead, I saw what he really was: a pathetic man who'd built his entire identity on controlling others, now facing decades in a place where he controlled nothing. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked for statements. I declined. This victory didn't need words. A month later, I stood in an empty office space in Lincoln Park, keys heavy in my hand. The Victim Restitution Fund, combined with my savings and a business loan Rachel had helped me secure, had made this possible: the Harper Foundation for Financial Abuse Recovery. Derek had contributed too, saying it was what his mother would have wanted. Even some of Greg's other victims had donated, turning their pain into purpose. The foundation would provide free financial counseling, legal resources, and emergency funds for people trying to escape financially abusive relationships. We'd help them reclaim their economic independence, understand their rights, and rebuild their lives. Patricia Morse agreed to be our first counselor, bringing her hard-won experience to help others. Mom volunteered to speak at support groups, sharing her story as a warning and a beacon of hope. We weren't trying to rebuild our relationship. That trust was too broken. But we could work parallel to each other, using our trauma to prevent others from experiencing the same. On opening day, as I hung my father's photo in my office, I thought about the journey from that night with the router to this moment. Greg had tried to steal everything: my inheritance, my family, my sense of safety. He'd almost succeeded. But in fighting back, I'd gained something more valuable than money: the knowledge that I could survive, that I could fight, that I could win, and now I could help others do the same. The phone rang. Our first client. a woman whose husband had drained their joint accounts and hidden assets. As I listened to her story, so familiar it made my chest ache, I said the words I'd wished someone had said to me: "I believe you, you're not crazy, and we're going to help you get free." By the end of our first year, we'd helped 43 people escape financial abuse. Each victory felt like another brick in Greg's prison, not the federal one where he served his time, but the prison of irrelevance. He'd wanted a legacy of power and control. Instead, his legacy was the foundation born from his crimes, saving people from men just like him. I never visited Greg in prison. There was nothing to say. But I heard from Derek that Greg had tried to run the same cons inside, trying to manipulate other inmates. They weren't as vulnerable as the women he'd targeted on the outside. Last Derek heard, Greg spent most of his time in protective custody, afraid of the very people he'd once thought himself superior to. Sometimes, late at night in my new apartment, a space Greg had never touched, never poisoned with his presence, I thought about forgiveness. Not for Greg. He deserved every day of his sentence. But for Mom, for myself, for the family we'd been before he destroyed it. Forgiveness would come, or it wouldn't. For now, I had work to do. Every person we helped escape financial abuse was a small victory against what Greg represented. Every woman who reclaimed her economic freedom was proof that predators like him didn't always win. My father had worked double shifts to leave me security. In the end, that money had been stolen, recovered, and transformed into something greater, a foundation that would protect others long after Greg was forgotten. Standing in my office one evening, watching the sun set over Chicago, I whispered to my father's photo, "We won, Dad. He tried to take everything, but we won." The router had been unplugged that night, cutting off my call for help. But in the silence that followed, I'd found my own power. And now, that power lit the way for others trapped in the dark. Greg had 22 years to think about that. I had a lifetime to make sure his kind never won again. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if this story resonated with you. And please share your own thoughts and experiences. Your voice matters. And together, we're stronger than any abuser who tries to silence us.